Welcome to Haley and the Brainstormers, raising awareness about mental illness, reducing stigma, and promoting mental wellness.
This evening, our topic is mental health and safety. And the idea was triggered because there was a piece where a man who had, there's no question about it, he had beheaded a fellow passenger on a bus and is now deemed well enough to go back into society with very, very few limitations. So I think that's brilliant that he has achieved that, but a whole lot of people are very concerned about it. So that's the trigger. But the real conversation is, well, what is mental health, and do you get better, and is there a risk factor associated? So in the room tonight, we actually have a psychologist who could very well have done this conversation for us, but I chose, and hopefully will be here as a resource if we have technical questions, but I have asked two mental health advocates to come out this evening. So I'm going to sit down and let them introduce themselves, but first is Barbara Swanston and also Victoria Broker, who is here, and both of them are for Campbell River, and both are very active in Campbell River and probably farther afield in the mental health field. So Barbara, will you just start us off? There we go.
Hi, my name is Barbara Swanston, and I am a suicide awareness advocate. And I came to this because on August 21st, 2010, my son ended his life by suicide. Suicide is a huge problem. It's the 8th cause of death in Canada. And the vast majority of people who die by suicide have a diagnosable mental illness. So my first question, I'm actually going to ask you a question. When I say mental health, what's the first word that comes to your mind? And I just blurt. First word.
Schizophrenia.
Depression.
Depression.
Okay.
Anxiety.
Stigma.
Right. Okay, good. When I say mental illness, what's the first word that comes to your mind?
Disability.
So basically, we look at mental health and mental illness and we say the same thing. But if you have a brain, and I think we all have brains, you have mental health. We all have mental health. Mental health is our cognitive, emotional, psychological well-being. Mental illness is a disruption of those things. So mental illness is when our mental health has been disrupted. Same as with physical health and physical illness. In any given year, 1 in 4 people will have a disruption in their mental health. That's 1 in 4 people in this room. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You get the drift. So the precipitating factor was Vincent Lee, who committed really a heinous act. He was a man with schizophrenia who was suffering from psychosis. He was deemed unfit to go to trial. He was treated, and now he's been released. What do I think about that? I think there should be conditions. But the question is mental illness a threat to public safety? Now, since Vincent Lee died, since Vincent Lee committed this act in 2008, there have been about 4,000 murders in Canada. The vast majority of those murders have been either criminal or domestic abuse, and maybe 1% have been situations like Vincent Lee, where somebody has been under a psychosis or something to do with mental illness. In the same period of time, there have been over 30,000 suicides in Canada. Whoa. So that's, if you think, if that was, in this, all of us was in this area, none of us would be sitting here. Every 90 minutes, somebody in Canada dies by suicide. Every 40 seconds, somebody in the world dies by suicide. Mental illness is often a fatal disease, and the fatality is often by suicide. For every person who dies by suicide, approximately 25 people, and that's a guesstimate, attempt suicide. So that's 750,000 Canadians since 2008 have attempted suicide. Most of them in the grip of depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, psychosis. So is mental illness, not mental health, is mental illness a threat to public safety? Well, I would say yes, it is, but the biggest threat comes to the person who's suffering from mental illness. We tend to look at people like Vincent Lee and go, oh my gosh, you know, we're at risk. No, you're much more at risk, or your loved ones are much more at risk of suffering a mental illness and harming themselves.
Boy. I'm Victoria Broker, and I'm a mental health advocate too. And how I came about that was actually by meeting Barbara, but I come at it from a perspective of a person with mental illness. And if I was coming to this 13 years ago, to this, well, first of all, I wouldn't come to this type of talk because I wouldn't be interested, for one thing. And 13 years ago, I had a whole set of beliefs, a paradigm about people that have mental illness that is completely different than the one that I have today. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. My throat's closing.
You're doing great.
Thank you. It took quite an episode when I went through menopause, so don't think that that'll happen to any of you that haven't been through menopause yet. But it took quite an episode in my life that lasted for months for me to understand that I had mental illness. And then it took quite a few more months and years, really, to realize that I had had mental illness all my life. Definitely since teenage, but now because I'm older, I managed to slip through the cracks, and even now I have a few diagnoses. Primarily the biggest one, I guess you'd say the biggest one, is bipolar. And people that have bipolar, on average now, it takes 10 years for them to be diagnosed, because they're often they're often seen maybe as depression, anxiety, things like that. But I'm very grateful to all of you for coming to this. It shows that, to me, that you're willing to find out about education for mental illness. And you probably have already educated yourself. Thank God for the internet and the knowledge that's being shared all over the world. I actually Googled what is mental illness. Not that I haven't read so many things about it over the years, but I read from the Mayo Clinic, which I think is a really reputable site. And so if you want to know what mental illness is, it's a pretty broad topic, but they succinctly spell it out, and I think that you would get a lot of learning from that. What else did I want to say? When I first got diagnosed, I hid, and I thought, and I will say this, that I was a scum of the earth, because I grew up with terrible misconceptions about people with mental illness, and you know, one flew over the cuckoo's nest. And even as a child in San Francisco, seeing these people, and somebody must have said these bag ladies, they have mental illness, and all I knew was mental illness was bad. So finding out that I had mental illness is like I couldn't believe it, and it took me quite a while to come to terms with it. But the good news is, it's wonderful to find out if you have a mental illness and you haven't known it previously, because then you can start into recovery, and you can start developing your own plan for how to manage it and learn about it, and your life can be so much better for that, and you can get the support. At least I've been really lucky to get the support that I need. Campbell River is incredible. And I get it all free, you know. And I probably talked more than 5 minutes. Thank you for listening.
This is one of the most courageous people I've ever met in my life.
Well done, Victoria. So there you have our introduction. So I don't know if you feel the same way about that event that happened on that bus in Manitoba, or if that changes anything. But does anybody want to start the conversation?
Can I just say one more thing about that?
Yes.
Just one thing. I read that, or I saw it in the TV when it happened, that he was going to be released, and I was horrified. I thought, my God, and I actually thought, if that was me, well, I don't know how I would live with myself, but if that was me that had done that, and you can't put yourself in somebody else's place, but I would never want to be released, because I would never trust that I wouldn't do something like that again. That's why I have such a close-knit support system that that I see almost on a daily basis, and so that people know if I'm changing a little bit. You know what I mean? I don't know if you know what I mean. But anyway, I just wanted to tell you that that was my perception of.
Thank you.
That.
Yeah, please.
Peter, I came specifically tonight because I missed my topic that I wanted to be here for, because I was in Arizona spending my 20th anniversary, but it was regarding mefloquine. And I will be talking about that a little bit, because I'm going to approach this from a very scientific point of view, and I'm a drug safety activist. And as much as I want everybody to get help for mental health, there's the other side of the coin, which is I study profusely the dangers of medications. And with psychiatric medications, there's a lot of dangers that are, I'm part of an international group of activists that are helping soldiers and veterans with PTSD. And the lead doctor that I'm working with has said the PTSD books are going to have to be rewritten, because a lot of those soldiers are damaged by mefloquine. And Romeo Dallaire even just did a presentation as well and admitted that he was taking that drug, and he asked Ottawa for him to stop. Now what's happened is there's a brain injury, and you don't treat a brain injury with more medications, and that's what they're saying. So we're looking at the approach to help people with brain injuries who get depression, anxiety, and things like that. So coming at it from a very scientific approach. So as you guys have your conversation, I want you to be aware that the UK and the US are leading. We're behind because Canada's smaller in terms of making sure that the dangers aren't there. And I do have a nephew that's schizophrenic. And the truth is, my sister's very wealthy, and she could help him, but they don't know how to help. So every day we wait, is he going to kill someone, or is he going to kill himself? And that's where we're at. And he's at the whim of the doctors, and he's at the whim of the medications that he takes. And I experienced mefloquine myself, and I'll tell you right now that I hallucinated on the 3rd pill, and it wasn't fun. So after the 5th pill, I stopped. But if I had continued taking it, I could have been damaged. And I'm so grateful that I used my own sense. So when you guys are having your discussion about this, I want you to know that you should go through more than just the mainstream media, because there's a bunch of us in the background working really hard on this and making sure that people don't get themselves into bigger trouble.
Thank you. If I could just, one thing you didn't mention is mefloquine actually is an anti-malarial drug, and it was administered to soldiers going overseas without their knowledge or consent, which is what she's referring to. We had an expert, a retired pharmacist, talking about health safety, prescription health, drug safety, and we asked her, we put that to her, and what she told us was that they've got very few tools that are effective against malaria at this point. All drugs have side effects. One of the well-known ones for this drug is psychosis, and the advocates are saying, well, we shouldn't be using that one.
Yeah, and I switched to something that was available, and unfortunately our soldiers for the last 25 years have been given a drug that has been causing brain damage, and you will see this in the news coming up, because we're working really hard.
Great, so thank you. So that's sort of caused and in the form of misdiagnosis of PTSD when actually it may be something else. But what we're here, so that's kind of coming at it from a very different angle, so thank you. But what we've also heard is the need for a network around a person to provide the support. Yeah. And veterans are awful hard to bring into a network like that. They're a pretty independent bunch. Anyway, who's next? It was you. You had your hand up.
Yeah, I was wrestling with, and I don't have any answers, but it seems to me that the press has a field day on sensational kinds of pieces where the gentleman who on the bus fits very, very well, but we don't hear anything about his context and his life experience that led him to that place on the bus. But moreover, I don't think we have any idea about what it's like, because we don't have the education in our society, and it's not okay. Mm-hmm. But we have this thing called normal that I think probably has done a lot of damage to people because they don't know what normal is, but they think it's, if you don't have symptoms, then I guess you're normal. Well, but there's just a lot of confusion, I think, and not much education out there, and a lot of sensationalist stuff, and then people get frightened.
Well, I think to sort of expand on that, if you Google stigma definition, what comes up is a disgrace associated with a circumstance, quality, or person, the stigma of mental disorder. Mm-hmm. And stigma is one of the huge things. Mental health is the, you know, the poor cousin of the medical system, and it's not. It's actually far too common when somebody presents themselves at, or is taken. A very dear friend of mine in October 2013, her daughter was brought to Peace Arch Hospital. Her daughter had bipolar disorder and had attempted suicide many times, and she was under the influence of either drugs or alcohol, and she was suicidal. The RCMP brought her there. They were very concerned about her. She was in the hospital for about 3 hours. She was sent home, and within 5 hours she was dead.
Are those situations happening because there aren't enough beds?
Hardly.
No, it's not because there aren't enough beds. It's because they aren't allocated for mental health issues.
That's what I meant when I say partly.
Thank you. You're here, and then I see you, and then I see you.
Yeah, I think one of the important things is for people who suffer from mental illness, be prepared to speak out about it publicly. I think of Margaret Trudeau, the Prime Minister's mother, who has written a book and has been prepared to be very public about the challenges that she has faced over her lifetime. I have a cousin who's a politician in another province, the most gregarious, positive guy you could imagine. 3 months ago, he decided he was suffering from severe depression. And instead of, you know, saying, oh, I've got a broken leg, I'm going to take a few weeks off, he went completely public with it and announced it to his constituents and to the Premier and everything else. And the response was fantastic. It was really positive. Everyone said, good for you to acknowledge that you are suffering from depression. Yeah. And I think we need more and more people in public positions who are prepared to do that.
It's only been about the last 5 years that people have started speaking out. Margaret Trudeau's book, I think, came out 10 years ago. So even in the 6 years that I've been involved, because really I was pretty ignorant before my son died about mental illness and the impact and the stigma, it's still huge though, and it takes, I mean, the reason I say this is one of the most courageous people I've ever met is because she stood up in 2011 and spoke to the Campbell River at the council chamber because we wanted to have a certain date designated Defeat Depression Day because we were organizing a walk, and she stood up and said, I'm a person with mental illness. And I just...
Why should I be ashamed? You know, and the more we talk about it, but about the beds, we need more money because mental illness is a physical illness. It's in our body, it's in our brain, and it's why should it not be getting the money that it deserves? And now the government is making mental illness and seniors a priority and is giving money to the provinces. So I'm hoping that we'll get more and more in our province, more services. Because if we treat people, I won't say much, so you guys can talk, but if we treat people when they're young and get them the interventions, so much can be avoided, so much pain and heartbreak and, you know.
Thank you. I'd like to come back to early intervention if I can, but I've got some other speakers, yes?
I'm going to riff off what this gentleman was saying, and that we didn't get much of a story about this man's journey towards the incident, and I also would suggest we didn't get any information about his journey out of it either. And you know, going back to what you were talking about before about fake news or alternative truths, if we only read what we got in the paper about this whole incident, we're only getting a fraction of what the truth is about this whole story. And so there are a whole bunch of people who have come out of the scientific community who've decided that this man is able to live his life within a certain continuity of risk, I would imagine. but I don't have any information about that. I can't context that. I'm left with a story that is frightening, but also you've given me some numbers to put it into context as well. I'm probably more likely to be killed by a drunk driver than I would be somebody like him. So I guess my question is, do you have any information about his journey out of this, and what went on in the minds of the people who were caring for him that led to them saying, yes, he's trustworthy?
I read a really good article. If you Google his name, Vince Lee, and I think he was in Manitoba, in, was it Selkirk, Manitoba? Because I Googled this after this happened, after it came out, and it talks about, you know, he was in there for a certain amount of time, and you know, I guess he met, there's a complete, very good story about him wanting to adhere to the treatment, and him getting more well, and, you know, not experiencing psychosis. And I think there's stuff on the internet about how the family tried to get help for him beforehand, and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't there. Yeah, so there's a lot on the internet.
It is synonymous then with an alcoholic story, right? Because an alcoholic will become mentally ill, and God forbid something like this happens, and then they come through their journey, and they walk into the community and promise themselves they'll not drink again and not drive and drink again, but they're left to their own devices in the same way, right? So,
well, and many people with mental illness, if you go to your doctor or you go to the hospital because you're having a crisis, you know, you're basically told, well, you know, you have to get your help privately. You know, unless you can get into somewhere like the mental health office in Campbell River, and I think there's one here too, and get treatment there. But, you know, for most people, you know, my friend's daughter, it was just, well, you know, okay, she gets stabilized, and then there's no follow-up. And
so I now have three hands, and I'm going to just give you a minute to process, Frank. I might ask you, like, under what terms would a person in this situation be eligible for free? When would you release a person like this back in the community? So I'll give you a chance to process that while I go to this person, and then this person, and then this person. Sorry, I'm back behind you first. Yeah, and you're next.
I wanted to comment on the federal initiative now that the province negotiated to actually look at mental health as part of our medical structure, which I think is incredibly positive. I looked at the analysis of what the province and the federal government agreed to, and I would say the majority of the money is going into acute services, which is good. I mean, that's the kind of thing you're talking about, people who need mental health beds and so on. But my concern is, and having worked in prevention, is that we're not doing enough for youth. The money for youth, for early intervention, prevention, is very small, in my opinion. And I think, for example, there's $1.5 million for all of the high schools in the province for prevention. So I mean, really, that sounds like a lot, but when you think about it, and especially with the stats you have on suicide, I don't know what percentage are youth, but in any case, I just wanted to know what you thought of the mental health services, the federal government. You did comment positively on it, and also the analysis that most of it will, in fact, and maybe it should, wind up with acute care as opposed to prevention and early intervention.
Thank you for that information. I didn't know what you just told me. I just thought, whenever I hear of anything, I'm like, thank you, God, and grateful for it. How exactly it's going to be dispersed, I didn't know. So I see it as a step in the right direction, and I see that the people just have to somehow ask for more. I don't know how, but we have to have a movement or something, you know, because it really affects, anyway. Thank you for that information.
And youth suicide is a big issue, but actually the age group, the group most at risk are men 35 to 55. So there's sort of a bell curve. But I think that if we can identify youth and get them the sort of services and treatment we need, that we can actually start to make a difference in that bell curve.
Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to add one point just for everybody who has an interest in sitting here. There is something called B4, stage 4, which is in fact early intervention, and something heard of it. And you can go online and just sign it. They won't ask you for money. There's nothing to do with money. But there's lots of good information on that site. But it also is, in my opinion, B4, stage 4, is about prevention and early intervention. And the feeling from that organization is if enough people sign this, it's called a manifesto, but whatever. If enough people sign it, then politicians will look at that and say, maybe we should start, if there's kind of a grassroots community interest in this, that they may start to look at. It's very hard. Prevention money is very hard to get because you can't see it the same way you can if someone's ill and you do something for them.
And yet depression is the #1 cause of disability. According to the World Health Organization, depression is the #1 cause of disability worldwide. It costs more money than anything else. So, if we're looking at saving money, then we need to be looking more at, and not to take away from any of the physical diseases, but in Canada, I mean, it is the top. We spend more on depression, on people losing time at work, etc., from depression than any other illness.
Thank you. Now,
I would like to speak to compliance, taking medication. For the fortunate people who have mental illnesses and have been diagnosed, I wish there was a way to see that they comply with taking their medication. I have personal experience with 3 people who are bipolar and 2 people who are psychotic, and they don't take their medication, and the family and the friends and the loved ones cannot make them. You cannot take them to the hospital and say, this is my nephew whom you diagnosed last month as bipolar. He's not taking his medication. Please supervise him, give him his medication. There's more than just killing people. A lot of people with mental illness hurt those around them. They don't mean to, they can't help it, but if the people who love them had more support at emergencies and were able to get them intervention, even temporarily, I think it would be better. Do you see anything changing for parents and relatives bringing their children in and insisting that they stay longer than an hour? Is there any change?
Can I just talk about anosognosia, which is like 50% roughly people with severe and persistent mental illness don't understand, can't comprehend because of their brain, that they do have a mental illness. And so you can see that if somebody was trying to tell you that you had to take this medication and you didn't understand, you didn't get it, and the other thing is, Dr. Xavier Amador wrote a book about, he lost his brother to suicide. There's hope in ways of developing relationships with people outside of the medication and trying to do it in a way that you can eventually get that person to a doctor and agree to take the medication, rather than forcing, because we can't, the Mental Health Act, I don't.
No, but when you're dealing with a person who has been diagnosed by the experts as a risk to themselves, is it good health to say, he won't take his medication, well, I can't make it? The Mental Health Act won't let me do anything. If Vincent Lee starts going off and starts carrying an axe, do we say, well, he's done it before. Couldn't we please intervene? Couldn't we spare the patients the pain?
thank you. If I may, you're next, but if I could, just before, Frank, would you help us out here? So how will this person be released? I understand he's not under terms. He said he will take his meds. Is there nothing to make sure that he does?
Well, I want to preface that. I'm not going to talk about suicide, and the vast majority of people who are likely to be to future harm to themselves or their families or loved ones. But I will talk to the idea of the potential of that person to kill again, okay? Many years experience in psychology and treating people with mental illness. I also did an internship at Oak Ridge Hospital for the Criminally Insane. So what happens is you are schizophrenic and you think this person is the devil and you are on a mission. You've got to kill the devil. That's kind of primitive thinking. And what we would like to think of is most people can entertain the notion of, I think that person's the devil, but maybe there's another explanation. So most people who are well educated or people who don't think in terms of good and evil, the devil and God and the struggle, will think twice, okay? In most situations where a person has killed somebody, it's often a family member, often, it can be gang related, it can be criminal related. But the vast majority of people who have mental illness and kill never kill again.
Oh.
Okay, never kill again. And what happens to them is they become a ward of the lieutenant governor, which means every year they're before a panel again who look at all the tests and all the things that have happened and all their cooperation with treatment and various other things. And then they assess whether or not this person is ready to be out in the community. The statistics of that person ever killing again is absolutely low. We're talking low to begin with and really low to carry on. And it's not contingent on medication alone. You say, oh, have them on meds, they'll be safe.
Right.
No, just like have them on meds and they won't kill it, they won't commit suicide. That's wrong too.
Absolutely.
Okay? Yeah. So compliance with medication is really a bugaboo. It really, it's just looking at helping that person with the support systems. And that's the most important thing. And most people learn from experience. Now there's two categories of people who are at risk of harming the public again. Sociopaths and psychopaths, okay? Rapists, serial rapists and people who've done that, that particular diagnosis is really risky. And so we have to be super careful. And even then, once in a while we make mistakes and that person goes out and rapes again. And that's terrible. And sometimes that person goes out and kills again, but very, very rarely, okay? Most stay behind bars for their entire lifetime because it's too much risk to the public. But for schizophrenia, for sure, low risk of killing an average person in our population. Very low risk. Because, just like you were saying, more chance to be hit by a truck than killed by such a person.
Fewer than 1% of murders. Fewer than 1%.
Yeah.
And repeat murders, very, very low.
Extremely low.
Thank you for that information.
In other words, the public should not be too concerned about that. And compliance with medication, I know with bipolar, the people in the family of bipolar people are so upset because they go out and buy a yacht or they bankrupt, they do all kinds of grandiose things when they're high. And a lot of people who are bipolar don't want to give up their highs. And that's why they don't take medication.
I want to.
I think that they're functioning well.
I want to. I never want a mania like that again. That's
a lot of people
has motivated
like their
me.
highs. And that's why you can't keep them on lithium because they say, I'm fine. So that's
well, thank you. And in fact, that was a myth that I held. I thought, give them the meds, everything's fine. But nope, that ain't it. So thank you. You fixed me on that one, but I've been making you wait.
It's okay. So I work for Island Health, and part of my job is to teach violence prevention. I teach a violence prevention course. And I guess I'm a little bit disturbed that within the healthcare community, many people don't know that if somebody has any type of violent behavior, they are flagged for the rest of their lives.
That's true.
There's a system that follows them for the rest of their lives that prevents us as workers from getting hurt by that person. And it's not to cause fear, it's more to allow us to know the factors that are leading up to this so that we don't repeat them and we don't agitate this person, and more to let us know how they're becoming agitated and when to leave and that type of thing, because we can't defend ourselves in, we can't carry a taser or whatever. So I guess I find it disturbing that we as healthcare workers all have the right, and we are to know about each person who could potentially become violent. But as citizens in a community, we're not allowed to know about people who could become violent and have history.
Well, what I'd like to say about that is that anybody can become violent.
Absolutely.
And yes, there are people,
Absolutely.
and you specifically are working with a population of people who possibly have that.
Well, more dementia and that kind of thing.
Right.
But anybody who goes into the hospital.
So how do we track that? Because under the right circumstances, I mean, none of us knows what we might do if we're threatened or somebody we love is threatened,
Right.
or I mean, we just.
This guy gets to change his name, and he gets to have a history where it's. And I mean, no disrespect to anybody with mental illness. I've got an extremely close friend with PSTD, but I just find it frustrating that there's no. If somebody has a history.
But I think as the psychologist was saying, sorry I've forgotten your name, but the risk of somebody like that reoffending or being, our question tonight is mental illness a public safety issue? And if we're looking at mental illness as a whole, I come back to the public safety issue is for the person with mental illness far more than the public at large being a victim or a target of violence from somebody with mental illness. And I think we do look at these, situations where somebody murders somebody, and for me, it's the analogy would be terrorists. We're hysterical, especially in the States. And yet, out of 35,000 murders in the States every year, fewer than 1% are by terrorists.
Yes. And I understand that, but I guess what I'm saying is, I wish that there was some sort of a system that really, because I really feel that people should be embraced and empowered and dealt with in a loving way rather than shamed and blamed, because how are they going to trust a system that allows them to fall through the cracks and just band-aids over massive problems?
Thank you. I think I've been ignoring this side of the room while you're
This is from ignorance. Is part of the problem, you said 10 years to diagnose your bipolar?
Well, for me, I was 50.
Okay.
50.
Is that a problem?
But now it's on average 10 years to diagnose a person with bipolar.
So this person's daughter of a friend who went into the hospital, if you went in with a limping, or they don't have a procedure to go through and find out if it's broken ankle or broken, they have a procedure. Now if they come in with issues of violence to themselves, is there a procedure? Are they?
There is supposed to be. My understanding in this specific case, and actually in a few other cases that I personally know about, is that there are procedures, and basically once the person calms down, usually somebody who has had a lot of interventions in their life, my friend's daughter, knows what the people want to hear. So she's in the hospital. She's been suicidal. She's been brought in by the police. Now she's embarrassed. She wants to get out. Oh no, really? Yeah, I'm fine. I'm okay. So she knows what to say. She knows how to behave in order to be released. So she's released, and 5 hours later she's dead.
So the diagnosis.
But they shouldn't have released her. I mean, basically the hospital admitted that procedures were not followed. And that they should not have, she wasn't seen by a psychiatrist. Nobody, somebody just said, okay, we're too busy. She's calmed down. She seems fine. Let's send her home. And they should not have done that. So yes, there are procedures, and often they're not followed, and often there are recommendations and whatever, and they're still not followed.
All I'm getting at is treatment. We need more treatment, but can we diagnose quick enough and good enough to understand what kind of treatment is required, or is that
sometimes we need. So if she'd come in with a heart attack,
yeah,
or she'd been hit by a car. I mean, my husband went in with a minor heart attack. They didn't let him go home because it was a minor heart attack. They made him stay in the hospital, right? She went in trying to kill herself. The police brought her in. They didn't want her to be released, and the hospital released her anyway. And then she died.
It depends. I hate to say it, but I think it depends on what hospital you're in, what kind of staff are on, what their beliefs about mental illness are. I've had nurses roll their eyes at me. I didn't know it. Somebody that was with me saw it. And, you know, you can tell when people are empathetic, compassionate, and when they don't understand, you know, but it's hard when you're in a crisis to know what's going on.
Thank you. I have a hand here and then here. Did I see you? Yes. Sorry, it was you.
I'm sorry. Well, if you go back to the beginning, what about education? And if you start the earlier the better, then what about nurses in schools again that are trained to recognize symptoms in children if you want to start early? You know, that would perhaps be beneficial in the long run.
Like they screen for eyes and hearing and vision and stuff like that. Yeah.
A nurse that's there and knows the children.
Well, and also programs. I mean, Laura here was part of a program where they went into schools with puppets, and they performed for children, and they to teach them about mental illness, to try and start from a very young age, so that kids understand, and that they to start to eliminate the stigma. And because, you know, if a child has mental illness and their behavior is bizarre, well, now they're a behavior problem. My son had ADHD, and he had a hard time sitting still, and so, you know, there were a lot of behavior issues, you know, and so he became this fringe kid. So it started very young, and he ended up with a profound depression. And yeah, I think it does start with education, not just, but also education for everybody to sort of to be more compassionate. We need to be more compassionate.
Thank you.
I think one thing we have to remember about the hospital, there's such a thing as voluntary admission and involuntary admission. If I have a heart attack, I'm certainly voluntary and I want treatment. If I'm bipolar and I'm in high, I'm not complying because I haven't been what we call pink slipped to be taken in. I'm free to leave under the freedom of information, the freedom as an individual. They cannot commit me unless I have done something. So we cannot put it all on the hospital. We have to work both ways. So there's a big difference of the revolving door in mental health at times.
Can I say something?
Sure.
At the same time, does that person in fact have free will? If that person is a danger to himself and has harmed himself, how can he make that decision?
I know, but they have I'm just playing devil's advocate. I know how to play the system. I'm not out of it completely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I know how to, I'm a repeater at the front door, so I know how to play the system. So how does the professional take that freedom away unless they have, you know, something really, really guaranteed, because otherwise they can be sued next week, unfortunately.
But you know, even in situations where there was a W5 did a program recently, and there was a girl in Alberta who stole her father's car and basically had a front-end collision. He tried to kill herself. You know, she didn't die. The person who was driving the other car didn't die. She ended up being taken to hospital. There was a suicide note in her car. They released her, and a week later she jumped from a bridge. Now, danger to yourself?
I think
pretty clear.
Psychologists would probably know more, but the person has to be certified by a certain number of doctors or psychiatrists or whatever, and they have to be a danger to themselves or others, and they have to meet a certain criteria.
Well, I'd like to know what the criteria is. I'll start off right off the bat. My son died by suicide in 2014, and he was in that same thing, that group of young men. And Scott could present himself so well. He was very handsome and very well spoken, but he tried to kill himself with an X-Acto knife. And so they transferred him to a hospital. This was in Saskatchewan. And that was the thing, I don't know why he wasn't certified, because he was a danger to himself. He had never, ever done anything anywhere near, but obviously it was
as worse as it could be. And I have since got all his medical records and I've read a lot of stuff, and I'm thinking, I still don't understand why you guys released him. I don't get it. It was Christmas time, and they said that he was gonna, he was going home with family on his wife's side, and he had left there. And I saw a picture of him and his 2 teenage kids out in the farmyard, and he was bloated. He just did not look himself, and already he was beginning to make his plan. And they say that he went into the town and got into a motel room and began to search for different ways to commit suicide. And so he ended up making a little fire in the back of a car, parked someplace in an isolated area, and that was it.
I'm so sorry.
And and I still can't believe it.
I know.
I did go talk to the psychiatrist, and that's exactly what they told me. Our hands are tied, you know.
I'm terribly sorry for your loss, but you're my next speaker. But Frank, are you able to help us here? So we were talking about this people that work the system, that you can't take somebody against their will, but these people aren't in their. They're not going to volunteer themselves.
Yes, it's a difficulty. We try to, if we feel that there's an imminent danger, and we have to establish facts that let us know that there's an imminent danger either to another person or to themselves, then we can certify them. And they're under observation usually for 2 days or 3 days, depending upon what the containment warrant is. And there has to be a panel to review whether or not that assessment of danger is still there, in which case they might have another period where they're incarcerated against their will in a mental health facility. But we have so many protections for individual rights that basically, if somebody wants to play the system and wants to look good, no, they'll be out in no time. And the other thing is that if a person is really, really intending to kill themselves, we can have suicide watches and all kinds of things. What happened in Toronto with this woman with postpartum depression jumped with her baby in front of a subway train, and they had a suicide watch, and they couldn't stop her. So, you know, you can say, well, that kind of decision, you're not of sound mind, but I can tell you that it's very, very hard to make a proper assessment.
Yeah.
We're still not able to absolutely guarantee that person's out of their mind, and we need to keep them contained.
Yeah.
And also, this is a very interesting statistic from Michael Yapko, who has studied depression. He's a psychologist from the States, and he's done a lot of work actually with antidepressants and showing basically how the medical and pharma industry has distorted all kinds of things by not, anyway, onward it goes. But anyway, Yapko was reporting a review that came out about a month ago of a meta-analysis, which means going all over the data in the last 50 years. And we now have the best predictor of suicide. And guess what it is? Chance. In other words, all the things, oh, you have to be depressed. You say, no, 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 you're not depressed. There are all kinds of people who kill themselves who aren't necessarily mentally ill or never been diagnosed mentally ill. And it's just an amazing statistic, okay? And I have seen and read about, of course, many people who were absolutely dedicated to killing themselves. And there's nothing that we mental health practitioners could do to contain that person. And sure enough, when they were on their own, and we couldn't stop it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I see your hand, but I've been making you wait.
My comment goes back to the difficulty of diagnosis, and one of the complications is if the person is on street drugs, where the professionals, well, where they're actually treating themselves using the street drugs for their illness, but the professionals will not diagnose somebody bipolar, if somebody's still on street drugs, they say, well, you got to clean yourself up first and then we'll reassess and see if you have a problem, but then they won't voluntarily get themselves into treatment.
So an individual with multiple problems, trying to sort out which is which, causing which behaviors. Thank you. You were next, and then I see you.
I just wanted to make a couple of comments. One is I agree that if we can get mental illness in youth, diagnosed in youth early enough, that would help. But I also know, as a person with mental illness and spending 20 years trying to get diagnosed as a youth, and it wasn't until my 40s that I was diagnosed, not with schizophrenic and not with bipolar, with a whole other issue, that adults need it equally as bad as children. Because like you as an adult, you slip through the cracks. And I think another thing that hasn't been brought up with mental illness for adults is a lot of mental illness, adults with mental illness live in poverty. So you're also, you know, if you get them admitted, you're only fixing one part of the situation. You're then sending them out to a homeless situation or a dysfunctional home situation, or you're sending them back into the same big problem that's there too. So I think it needs to be there for the adults as well, the help and support. And if you're living on a low income, you cannot afford to pay for help. You cannot afford to pay for psychiatrists and counselors. And the waiting list to see them is huge. I waited almost 5 years to get counseling.
Yeah. I know, it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's unconscionable. I agree.
So thanks.
In Campbell River, we have what's called the ACT team, which sees clients that need help in the community, you know, and 7 days a week, and we'll go to people's homes and stuff like that. That's through Island Health, and Island Health is a free service. It's an excellent, I can't say enough, it saved my life. The wait to get an intake, if you're eligible for Island Health, mental health and substance use services, varies, but you know, you can give them a call and find out if you're eligible. The same with here in Courtney. And they've taken the substance use clinicians, which are all integrated, it's all one really, but the substance use clinicians will see people. You don't have to be abstinent to start working with a substance use clinician, and abstinence isn't always the answer nowadays. Like they're looking at it from a completely different approach, and maybe down the line the person might get abstinent, or they might decide what works for them if they want to continue using alcohol or drugs. But at least getting a relationship going and getting it into the services somehow. Because if people say, well, you can't come because we're not going to look at you because you're using. So the system is changing. Lots of good things are happening. At least in Campbell
Thank you
River.
for that positive note, Victoria. I was starting to feel quite depressed.
Oh,
I had a hand behind you, and then you.
Well, I was just thinking again, education, and perhaps a lot of it is the abuse of street drugs. And again, if it's educated in schools how important it is not to start drugs. I think that sort of has gone the way and they became fashionable, which is, wrong, but it sort of fell out of grace educating children about not using drugs. They stopped talking about it. I remember.
I think that Just Say No, the DARE program and other programs actually were not very effective.
That's what we've learned. They just didn't work.
It's as soon as you start focusing on something you don't want, you actually get more attention. You need to actually, the education needs to be on what you do want, not on what you don't want.
And nurturing the children so that they don't need to, in ways that if the family can't do it, as a community, so that the children grow up and don't feel the need to self-medicate.
Interestingly, participation worked. So maybe we just did it wrong. Maybe we can do something, but we did it wrong. Please.
So one good news piece, I think, about education is Sesame Street has just added a puppet.
Yes.
Who's on the spectrum, so autism spectrum, and is teaching children how to handle children that they don't understand. And I think that's a sincere step towards educating it. I mean, getting it onto Sesame Streets before they hit school is wonderful. And it's usually done really well. So I haven't watched it for a long time. But
my daughter in elementary school had a Down syndrome girl that went through all of elementary school with her class. And they learned more from Hannah than, I mean, it was just, the kids would themselves change their games and whatever so she could be part of them.
Well, thank you for that pitch on inclusion, but we are a little off topic. But we're not off topic when we talk about early intervention. That's fine. Thank you.
So so the education piece, and like I said, I always think of my sister who there's no shortage of money or whatever for her son, but she doesn't know how to handle it. And so one thing that you mentioned, and that I'm going to be doing, and I'm going to be doing it for veterans, and we're going to be trying to get it among the veteran groups because the veterans are finding they're able to help themselves out better than anybody. And even, so
peer support.
So it's suicide prevention strategies. It is online. I will probably bring it to this community at some point if it hasn't been. I haven't found out if it has been to this community, but it's basically strategies that people can just join. And it's just that if you know somebody who's suicidal or having some difficulties, well, we need to be educated. I don't want to rely just on the clinician because, like I said, it's a 1 or 2 year wait. My sister, stigma, she won't say anything among her. She's got a very select group of people that she'll talk about it because they've got a status position and they don't want to talk about it. So even I don't talk about it with her. She won't talk about it. What to do with her son. I mean, I feel helpless too. So I think the more that we all just get in those groups and talk about it. What do you do when somebody says that they're not doing well? I don't know if half the people here know what to do, and I think we all need to learn that.
One thing. On the end of this month, I'm starting a 4-day workshop at Campbell River Mental Health. Actually, it's going to be at the Schizophrenia Society, and it's called Mental Health First Aid.
That's what different groups that provide that.
Yeah, and I would urge anybody to take that. Barbara's taking it. And
it's fantastic. It's like, you take first aid to find out if somebody collapses in front of you, what do you do? And actually a friend of mine in Ireland who teaches mental health first aid and also regular first aid, when he took the mental health first aid, he said, I've used regular first aid twice in 25 years. He said, probably weekly I use things that I learned in the mental health first aid course.
Even the Canadian Red Cross is actually planning on doing that.
So you can Google mental health first aid and you'll find
there's lots of programs available.
Please.
Yeah, and just a comment, without taking any kind of treatment involvement with people with experiencing mental illness, I think what makes a difference, I think it makes a difference. Let me give you an example. We have a neighbor who has a son who is mentally ill, and he's in and out of hospital, depending upon how he's doing, but he lives at home, and we see him. We see him walking around, riding his bike, and in the yard and whatever. We stop and talk.
Treat him like a normal.
He's a person.
We don't treat him like he's some sort of
person
that we can't have a relationship with. Go into the bank and I hear somebody swearing at the teller. I mean, I'm a little bit concerned when it happens in a bank, but it could be someone with Tourette's. I mean, how do you open yourself to a potential and still feel safe? I guess it takes a little bit of courage to do it, but then you gain more courage, and then you aren't as quick to make a snap judgment and say, not okay.
Good point.
You just open a little bit. Protect yourself, perhaps, if that's what you need to do. If you're unsure, educate yourself. There's lots on the internet. There's lots of people to talk with, but what a difference it makes in the lives of people who want to be in the community like us.
Thank you. I found the same thing with the homeless. They love it when you stop and talk. It's 8 o'clock. And respectful of your time, in a moment I'm going to give you each a chance to say a final word. But I'd like to thank all of you for coming out. You obviously cared, and that's a good place to start. And we've learned a little bit from each other. I always learn from you, so thank you for teaching me. And now, please, if you got final thoughts.
I just wanted to say God bless you and thank you for coming out and being willing to talk about the subject that is so near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, and I'm glad we brought up the mental health first aid program. It's really amazing. It's a 2-day program. Depending, it could be over different time frames, but it's really worthwhile. And I think it comes back to really educating ourselves. So we're talking about diagnosing people, but also educating ourselves. I think your point was well taken. I really can't expand on that. To have compassion and kindness and tolerance, because 1 in 4 people, if you have a brain, you have mental health, and anyone can have a mental illness, can develop a mental illness.
Haley and the Brainstormers is brought to you by the Campbell River and North Island Schizophrenia Society. Thanks for watching. I hope you like our videos. Please subscribe below to support our cause and to receive all our unique updates.